Okay, so the audience are arriving. Okay, Dina, the attendees are coming in now.
That's lovely, thank you.
Once it looks like everyone's arrived, ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, Dina, ready to go.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. So this webinar's purpose is to outline the proposed changes to climate change policies that will be delivered through the local plan partial update. And the webinar will cover policies on zero carbon construction, electric vehicle charging and renewable energy. The proposed policies will support the priorities for the climate emergency. So, welcome to everybody. My name is Dina Romero and I'm the leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council. This is one of 4 webinars to discuss planning policy as we're in a critical period of change and opportunity. We are currently consulting on the potential policy changes through the local plan partial update, and the consultation runs until the 18th of February. It is important to the Council that we give people an opportunity to have a bigger say in helping to shape our future planning policy direction. Other webinars have already taken place on how to respond to the consultation. HMOs and housing supply, these were recorded and you can access them through the Council website. Today we are focusing on the role planning policy has to play in directly addressing the climate emergency. One of the main drivers for preparing the local plan partial update is to amend the adopted climate change policies to ensure that planning decisions can help to address the climate emergency. In March 2019, the Council committed to providing the leadership to enable Bath and North East Somerset to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Our first area-wide carbon footprinting study enabled the identification of 3 priority areas for action. Firstly, buildings energy efficiency and zero carbon new builds. Secondly, a shift to mass transport, walking and cycling. And finally, rapid and large-scale increases in renewable energy. So I'm now going to turn to my panel and ask them a series of questions, and also ask them to perhaps give a little bit, put a little bit meat on the bone for this webinar. So before I move on with that, I will introduce the panel. So I have Tim Ball, who is the Cabinet Member for Housing Planning and Economic Development. I also have with me Richard Deone, who is the Deputy Head of Planning, and Alice Barnes, who is a Planning Officer, George Blanchard, who is a Planning Officer, and also Sarah Grimes, who is the Corporate Sustainability Officer. So I'm coming back to Councillor Tim Ball to ask this. Tim, could you please outline what difference the local plan partial update will make and what specific policy areas are going to be reviewed and updated?
Yes, thank you. This session will look at the role of planning in addressing the climate emergency. Planning has an important role to play in helping to address all 3 policy areas of the climate emergency Dina has mentioned. This is right at the heart of local plan partial update. The update will be reviewing and changing policies relating to development and transport. This session will focus on proposed changes to policies in 3 key areas on sustainable construction, electric vehicle charging and renewable energy.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'm now going to ask Alice and George if they would like to just talk us through a brief presentation.
Thank you, Dina. This presentation will look at how planning policy can help contribute to the priority areas in climate change. So as Dina has mentioned, Bath and North East Somerset has declared a climate emergency. And through this, the council has identified 3 priority areas which need to be addressed: the energy efficiency of buildings, sustainable transport and local renewable energy. The next slide. So through this presentation, we want to look at how we can address these priorities through planning policy. And we're looking to address these priorities through the local plan partial update and also our supplementary planning documents. So in this presentation, we're going to look at our emerging policies, which are a zero carbon construction policy, electric vehicle policy, and renewable energy policies. It's worth noting that additional work is also being progressed through the council's supplementary planning documents, which are the sustainable construction and retrofitting and energy efficiency and renewable energy guidance for listed buildings and undesignated heritage assets. These documents are being updated at the same time as the partial update, and we're hoping to have drafts ready at the same time as the draft of the local plan partial update. So looking at our existing sustainable construction policies, so at the moment we can pick out SCR1, which is in the placemaking plan, and that regards our on-site renewable energy requirement, and CP2, which is our sustainable construction policy in the core strategy. Along with these policies, we also currently require a sustainable construction checklist with applications, and that details the sustainable construction measures that are taking place within a development. So through these policies, at present, we're able to ask in major new buildings a 19% carbon reduction, and 10% of which we can require from renewable energy. And through minor new buildings, we can require a 19% reduction. For medium or major existing buildings, we have policy CP2, which is our retrofitting policy, and that allows us to require a 10% reduction through renewables or energy efficiency. So what are we proposing to do? So through the proposed zero carbon construction policy, we're proposing to replace SCR1 and CP2 with a new zero carbon construction policy. So that will use what's called an energy hierarchy. And for new build residential development, we would look for a minimum reduction of 10% through fabric performance, then a further minimum reduction of 35% through renewable energy. And then we would look to offset the remaining emissions that can't be mitigated on site through financial contributions. For new build non-residential, we're using a very similar policy, but we're able to ask for a minimum of 15% through fabric performance. And we're also looking for major non-residential development, a possibility of asking for a BREEAM excellent standard as well. So for existing buildings, as I've said, the sustainable construction checklist allows us to require a 10% reduction on the retrofitting of buildings. We're looking at 2 options on this, either bringing that requirement into the wording of policy CP1 and just tweaking the wording, or we can increase this requirement to 20%. And then also with sustainable construction, we wanted to touch on the Future Home Standard. So the Future Home Standard is a consultation that was run by the government in early 2020. This looks to amend building regulations so that carbon reductions can be required through fabric performance and renewable energy through building regs. So the results of this are very new, and they've only recently been published. And whilst these amendments won't come until 2025, so we will still be pursuing a zero carbon policy, the government is now proposing an interim uplift of a 31% reduction. But this hasn't been introduced yet. It is alluded to be introduced this year. So we are going to be undertaking further work to ascertain how this is going to affect our proposals, but we will still be seeking to have a zero carbon construction policy in the local plan partial update. So moving on to electric vehicle charging, this policy is proposed to apply to new buildings where parking is provided. So we have got a number of options listed in our document, and I'm going to try and summarise it here. So we're looking at different options, either requiring 100% active charging for all parking spaces. This is where the infrastructure will be installed on the development and the charger is on site. Or we would look at requiring 80% passive charging and 20% active charging. Now, passive charging is where the infrastructure and the ducting is installed in the development, but the charger isn't installed. Both options have their pros and cons. Active charging means that the charger is already available for the user. Passive charging allows for flexibility in the style of charger, depending on the user's requirements, and it means that the most up-to-date technology can be used. We're looking at where we apply these policies. It may well be that it's just major development, or it might be minor and major development, and we're also looking to apply this to residential and non-residential. And just to give you a bit more of an idea of why this policy is restricted to new builds with parking spaces. So electric vehicle chargers can be installed under permitted development, which is when you don't need to make an application for planning permission. In a couple of instances, this can include a unit within a parking area, or a local authority can install an on-street charger. Therefore, you can install a charger on an existing driveway or a car park without the need for a planning application, and local authorities are allowed to install on-street chargers. That's why this policy is relating to development where parking is provided, because in other cases it doesn't need an application for planning permission. It's also worth noting that work is being undertaken to update the council's parking requirements. This has been done through another supplementary planning document outside of the partial update. So I'm now going to pass over to George, who's going to update you on renewable energy policy.
Thanks, Alice. So yeah, just to outline where we are with our current policies on renewable energy. We have the core strategy, which has policy CP3, which sets out the target for renewable energy in the district by 2029. That's 110 megawatts. And then in the placemaking plan, which kind of provides more detail on development management policies to the background in the core strategy, we have SCR3, which is on ground-mounted solar arrays, and we have SCR4 on community renewable energy schemes. There have been a few issues that we have identified since the adoption of the core strategy and placemaking plan. The key ones being that there's currently 24 megawatts of installed capacity within the district, which is quite a gap below the target set in the core strategy. There's also been changes in national policy. Primarily, this relates to wind energy, where national policy requires us to outline areas where we think wind turbines could be suitable within the district, and to in order to encourage wind, we therefore have to bring forward a policy in our plan that will do that. And also the climate emergency declaration, which sets a target for the council up to 2030. It should be said there's a bit of a technical difference between the target that we can use in the partial update and the target for the climate emergency, in that where this is a partial review, we can't change the targets, but we will be looking to bring that forward in the next version of the local plan. So the first amendment to discuss is we are doing an amendment to CP3 regarding energy balancing plan. Since the adoption of the development plan, there have been a range of technologies that have become commercially viable for providing power to the grid. Some examples of these improvements of solar technologies, and also an increase in battery storage plants that just went around as often in 2014. Another technology that wasn't previously prevalent at the time of the adoption of the development plan are balancing or peaking plants. These are power plants designed to balance the fluctuating power requirement of the electricity network and operate during periods of high level demand for electricity or shortfalls in electricity supply. These tend to be sort of gas turbines or gas engines that obviously burn natural gas. But clearly, having stability in the grid and being able to balance supply is quite important, and particularly with moving towards 100% renewables, where you want to be able to offset when times when the wind isn't blowing or there isn't sunshine. However, there's concern within the council that gas power plant undermines the council's commitment to addressing the climate emergency and the goal to achieve 100% clean energy across all sectors by 2030. So with this amendment to CP3, we're proposing to amend it to require that development providing energy to the grid contributes to the core strategy targets for renewable energy, and that balancing plant that increases the carbon emissions for such as those that burn fossil fuels will not be acceptable. So we're kind of looking for battery storage rather than burning fossil fuels. And as mentioned earlier, the local plan partial review aims to help facilitate wind energy installations to meet our target by providing greater clarity and directing wind turbine applications to areas of search within the district. These areas of search are based primarily on landscape sensitivity and impacts as required by national policy. The options document, which is up for consultation, sets out the approach for this in two parts. So we have DM6, which is more of a criteria set policy, so how a development management planning application would be dealt with. The key part of that is that this policy would say that proposals for wind energy development must lie within an area identified as being potentially suitable for this type of development. And DM7 lays out the options for this, which is based on the evidence in our landscape sensitivity analysis. And so the two options are, and I'll show this on a map in a second, is saying that moderate and less sensitive landscape areas would be suitable for wind turbines, or moderate, high and less sensitive landscape areas would be suitable. So I'll just show you these on a map. So this is a map for based on the evidence by LUC for, I skipped over the large one. So this is for large turbines. And I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see the key. So these are the zones outlined. So you've got high, moderate, moderate, low, and low. If I zoom back out, a lot of the high impact areas, the important hillsides around Bath and the AONB, around the Chew Valley area, and you'll see for median turbines, these are 95 meters to blade tip, where they're a lower height of turbine, the impact of them is slightly less. So the landscape sensitivity for these types of projects would be lower. And then again, for small turbines, you start to see a lot more moderate and moderate low areas coming forward. So that's the option in relation to wind is, should we allow wind in moderate high areas or just go for moderate areas? The benefit of going for moderate high is that you would have more land available for these types of projects. So it's just a plug of how to respond to the consultation. I'm guessing these will probably be available in the YouTube page afterwards for the links, but you can respond through our consultation portal by email or by post. And just to confirm the dates, so we're at the options consultation stage now, and then we'll move to the draft plan in May, June time, and then hopefully adoption by spring 2020, although that's dependent on the independent examiner being available and issues like that. As Alice outlined, there are a few other planning tools available that are available for residents to use now. So we have the Sustainable Construction Checklist, the Sustainable Construction and Retrofitting SPD, which is linked with the review of the listed buildings and energy efficiency one. And there are also a few guidance notes for climate emergency in the historic environment, and the permitted development checklist for energy efficient and domestic renewables. And again, just some more links to more information on the work we're doing.
Made the classic mistake of speaking whilst on mute. Thank you very much, George and Alice. And obviously that was quite a lot of detail in that presentation. So the details of how to contact us and the links to the various websites as well as the presentation will all be available on the YouTube facility after this presentation. So this webinar has concluded. And just to reiterate, obviously for consultation, we would in ordinary times be consulting in a very different way, and would have taken much of this out to different places, and there would have been perhaps opportunities for people to get involved in the consultation in other ways that weren't predominantly online. And we do know that the way that we are having to consult is slightly uninclusive of everybody. So if you are aware of anybody that to perhaps put their views forward through the internet, through online processes, then let us know, and we can make sure that they either can send in their consultation response just sort of as a hard copy by letter, or there can talk through other options available for them. So just let us know. So, as I said, thank you for the presentation. I think one of the questions that has come up quite a lot is around the delay between the council declaring it wants to do something, such in its declaration in 2019 of the climate emergency, and then last year of the nature emergency, and why that can't then be implemented immediately. So I think it'd be really helpful if somebody could just talk through why it is that we have to go through a different process to make sure we have planning policies that actually match declared ambitions.
Sorry, yeah, I'll take that one, Dina. Yes, the way the planning system
Thank you, Richard.
operates, that's okay. The way the planning system operates in this country is it's what's called a plan-led system, and that means that all planning applications as the starting point are determined against or in accordance with the policies in an authority's development plan or its local plan. So therefore, in order to make sure that all of the decisions the decisions that are made in relation to planning applications, that they are helping to address the climate and indeed the nature emergency, we need to update our policies. Now, unfortunately, that process of updating policies is quite a lengthy one, because it has to be supported by evidence. We need to make sure we engage stakeholders, including the public and the communities, on those policies, and then eventually it has to go forward to be examined, what's called examined by a planning inspector. That process can generally take up to 3 years, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to do it more quickly than that. So we're just going to focus on updating parts of the local plan, particularly those relating to the climate and nature emergencies, and we're going to, as a result, we're going to look to do that more quickly. So the hope is that we will have a new set of policies in place by early next year, which can then be used to determine planning applications and, as I say, move forward the process in the right direction. So we are better addressing the climate and nature emergency. And that is very much right at the heart of the reason as to why we're preparing the partial update.
Thank you very much, Richard. And just as an aside, I think this might be a question more for Tim than others. So some of our audience might be aware of WECA and of the the sort of spatial plan that WECA will be devising, how much weight does our own declarations as a council on climate and nature emergency and the work that we're doing on the local plan, how much weight does that have in terms of the plan that WECA will be producing?
Okay, it would be nice if we all were able to do a full local plan. Unfortunately, we cannot do that at this moment in time because we are waiting for the WECA plan to go through its processes. It's currently in the process of being developed at the moment. It's not going to be ready till early 2023, hence the refresh of our local plan to get policies in place. Our policies will have quite a bit of influence on the WECA plan when it actually comes through for adoption in early 2023. A lot of work to do yet, but we have a long way to go. But getting our refresh of the local planning now brings climate change policies to the fore of the local council and presses the other councils to follow us in line.
Thank you very much, Tim. So I've got some, sort of more general questions, and I'll try and bring in some of the questions that we've been sent either before the webinar or also during the webinar as well. So I'm going to turn to renewable energy. And we know the council's committed to very ambitious renewable energy targets through the core strategy. Generally, how are we doing so far? I think maybe George or Sarah can pick that up.
So yeah, in the presentation, we've got 24 megawatts of installed capacity, so there's a bit of a gap there. Sarah, you've been involved in some work in what we need to do to get to 2030, don't you, the targets for that, and the stretch pathway modelling, which outlines the more sort of challenging figures for the council. I don't know if you want to go through those.
Yeah, certainly, thank you. So our initial study to look at the pathway to net zero by 2030 showed we would need, if we were going to basically do our bit for the national targets on renewable energy, showed a figure of 300 megawatts that we would need to have installed. But what we're very keen to do is make sure that any target that we do set in the new local plan, in the full local plan, new local plan, in a few years, is to have an evidence-based policy that's based on the actual renewable energy resource in the district. So we are, as part of a West of England project with North Somerset, South Gloucestershire and Bristol, we're doing another renewable energy resource assessment to actually look at what the technical and likely potential for renewable energy is in the district. So what we would expect to see is the target being updated in line with that, and in line with what we need to do in order to meet the net zero 2030 target. And there's lots of different ways you can look at a target for renewable energy like that. You could say, okay, do we want to produce all the power that we need in Bath and North East Somerset within the district? Or do we want to assume that some power will be coming in, for example, from offshore wind turbines located elsewhere, from undersea pipelines or cables and the like? So there is some work to be done to actually reset that target in the next edition of the local plan, but it will very much take into account our climate emergency objective.
Can I add to that as
yes,
well,
of course, Richard.
Yeah, just to make that distinction, I think Sarah's probably hopefully made it clear enough. Obviously, that reviewing of the target, really important, and that will take place through our new local plan, which will follow on from the WECA spatial development strategy that Tim Ball has mentioned. The partial update, the core strategy target is going to remain the same, and we're only around about a fifth of the way to delivering that target, despite the fact we're pretty much halfway through the plan period. So we accept there is a lot of work to do, and that's what the partial update is focusing on, is trying to create a more positive strategy for facilitating renewable energy infrastructure to come forward, and specifically in terms of wind energy, rather than just relying on each scheme being sort of assessed on its individual merits. We're trying to set out a policy approach whereby we sort of direct, if you like, and focus that development activity and those proposals on the areas that are more likely to be acceptable. There is I suppose a balance to be had, and there is an impact on things like landscape, but what we're trying to do is is facilitate the appropriate scale of wind energy development in the right parts of the district in order to help us deliver on that renewable energy target.
Thank you. Yes, because we certainly for the city itself, the city of Bath, we've got to take in a wide variety of other constraints. So not just the green belt that obviously applies to lots of places across the country, but also and AONBs, but also our World Heritage Status designation as well. So I'm going to move on now to look at, my apologies, I've lost my place here. I was going to just move on to look at what people can do with their homes, because obviously we are aware that lots of places have particular challenges. And I know that last year we held a webinar that was about green homes. So it might just be worth just recapping with particular reference to listed Georgian properties and other homes that have challenges. What more can be done to your own homes, and how changes to planning policy will help?
I think the statistic is about 1/3 of our carbon footprint comes from existing buildings, and that work is going to need to be done for us to be carbon neutral by 2030, and we do need to do what we can. But in planning terms, that can be quite difficult because we can only influence what comes through the planning system, and also we can't require works that go beyond what somebody has applied for. So say somebody applies for a listed building, we can't then insist that they retrofit their entire home. That said, a lot of retrofitting measures don't necessarily require an application for planning permission. There's a lot of things you can do under permitted development, such as, internal insulation. A lot of solar panel installations may not require planning permission. I think maybe relating back to you mentioning about more of our heritage buildings, and yes, certainly in the case of like a listed building, you would need listed building consent, or there might be certain places in a conservation area where you might need planning permission. And in those cases, I would say that we have 2 SPDs. We have Sustainable Construction SPD and also one on listed building guidance, which are in the process of being updated. And through those, we're looking at how we can help people better address climate change and how they can sort of understand what they can do to their building. And also on our website, there is a permitted development checklist, which you can use to try and ascertain what you can do to your house before you have to make an application for planning permission. And there's also in the heritage section of our website, our heritage manager has pulled together a lot of guidance on heritage buildings. So if you are in a listed building, that's a really good place to look for guidance on what you can do to your house. So work has also been underway to update these SPDs, and hopefully those will be in draft at the same time as the partial update.
Thank you. And so just to reiterate a point that you sort of alluded to, can zero carbon be required on existing buildings?
No, well, it's difficult to require that because like through the planning system, because you can only control what is applied for. So you can't insist on works that go beyond the remit of an application. And if the building already exists, the work will likely be just to change a certain aspect of the building, so an extension, a dormer window, etc. So yeah, it's very difficult in that sense. We can only sort of work within the planning framework, and we can only use the kind of the controls that we have.
Thank you, Alice. So we move on then to looking at planning applications that might come in for a whole development, and how will zero carbon policies affect the viability of development? Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. Yeah, in preparing the plan, we are required to make sure that we can show that all of our policy requirements are deliverable, and in particular financially viable, so that those requirements don't mean or render a development unviable and therefore not likely to come forward. So in preparing the plan, what we will be doing is a viability testing, and that viability testing will be based around assumptions to some extent on land values, but also costs. So we've got some up-to-date evidence in terms of the costs of introducing some of these zero carbon construction measures, but we'd also have to factor in and test other requirements, so things around providing affordable housing, providing green infrastructure, addressing something called biodiversity net gain. So there's a whole range of, if you like, policy asks or policy requirements that the council would want to impose on a development, and we need to test the viability of all of those. That viability testing will be done alongside preparing the policies for the draft plan. So when we publish the draft plan in the spring for consultation, we will also be publishing the viability testing of that, in order to hopefully show that all of the things we'd like to achieve, that they are financially viable.
Thank you, Richard. And I guess your question, sorry, that your answer leads me to a question that was pre-submitted, which is about how the council can meet their climate change and greener sustainability objectives, including areas such as ensuring biodiversity net gain. So perhaps it'd be helpful here just to hear what the council can do in terms of perhaps compulsory purchase orders and other measures to acquire the necessary land in order to put in place climate emergency mitigating infrastructure. Not sure whether that's an Alice or Sarah question.
I can start. Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
Compulsory purchase orders, that is it's an interesting suggestion, and it's certainly something it can be done, but it is a very difficult route. It's very time consuming, and it is also very costly. Through our housing and economic land availability assessment, we do know that there is a lot of land available that's been promoted by developers, and so that is quite likely that will, move through the planning system, and so compulsory purchase orders may not sort of be necessary to drive this forward.
Thank you, Alice. Richard.
Yeah, I think allied to that, just to emphasise, we are looking to progress the policies so that they do in effect require and help deliver obviously zero carbon construction, but also other measures, including biodiversity net gain. So what we will be doing through the partial update is, in terms of the sort of ecological measures, and I know that's not the focus of today's session, but just to answer that question, we will be, introducing policies and allocating sites in a way that we ensure that, the biodiversity and the ecological value and habitats on site are not lost. And in fact, we will go further than that. We will be seeking to require that ecological enhancement is delivered through what is called biodiversity net gain. And again, we've consulted on a couple of options on that in the partial update. One would be achieving a 10% net gain at least, and the other would be looking to achieve a 15% net gain. Obviously, those two options will be viability tested. The intention is that the council will also produce supplementary planning document on biodiversity net gain, really setting out how we would deliver that. So the priority will be that is delivered on site. But that's not always possible. Depends on the type of site and the circumstances of that site. So it may be sometimes we need to look at measures as to how we would enable it to be delivered off-site, and those measures will be set out, or the approach will be set out in that supplementary planning document, and that will be consulted again later in the year. So if people are interested in that particular subject area, keep an eye out for that one. Probably will be consulted at some point in the spring or summer.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm just going to spend a little bit of time on viability testing to pick up a couple of questions that have been raised in the chat and also online. The basic question is, does viability testing take into account whole life costing? So a measure may increase the cost of a build, but may save the purchaser more over time. And does viability include the concept of sustainability?
That's they're quite technical questions, so I won't go into a lot of detail. Yes, I mean, viability testing can and should take into account whole life carbon. The difficulty is I suppose agreeing and underpinning the assumptions that are made, both not just in terms of the costs. The costs is you know, we've got a reasonable understanding of the costs. Coming back to the question, the difficulty is what assumptions you would make in terms of the likely increased purchase price, if you like, or the increased value for the developer of those properties. But I would certainly accept that properties that are built to a zero carbon or a more energy efficient standard, because of the reduced running costs, generally they're more attractive to a purchaser, and therefore you would think, and I think it's quite logical, that they would generate a higher value for the developer. And I think, again, there's evidence emerging that is the case. We just need to look at how we quantify that, if you like, in terms of the viability testing, which really is a very figures-based and financial-based process, but it is something that we are looking at. I don't know, Sarah, whether you want to add to that at all, because I know it's something that you've also been looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yes, I think that's more or less summed it up. I think there's the issue of whole life carbon, which is adding on the impact of embodied carbon emissions, so from the building fabric, and at the moment they aren't within the government building regulations don't look at embodied carbon, so that's an area of policy that we're consulting on moving into. And as Richard was saying, any policy like that, so if we're requiring developers to reduce the embodied carbon in their projects, we need to look at how much that would cost developers. And we are going to be producing that evidence to look at through the viability testing process. And then there's the question about can you consider, so for example, like Richard was saying, that if you've got to live in a very energy efficient building, it costs less to run. Can the viability assessment pick that up? And the answer is not. Possibly not at this stage, just because it looks only at the capital costs of the building. So it assumes the developer is going to walk away from the project once it's complete, sell it off and walk away. And then I suppose the question comes back to, as Richard was saying, could you actually charge more for the building on the basis of there being lower energy bills? And there is very much an emerging area of work around that, which a lot of it centres on mortgage lenders and whether they'll lend more on the basis of a building being slightly more expensive, on the basis of the people in the building having more money because they're not spending on energy bills. And so that's kind of an emerging area that we would hope to see in the next couple of years as government and others are pushing much more towards higher performance buildings. So yeah, but luckily, I mean, what we found in our own studies is that especially as the government standards for building performance rise, the actual uplift to get to net zero carbon isn't actually a gigantic cost in itself, even capital cost wise. So we'll be further releasing reports on that as they're produced.
So like everything, this is an ongoing moving work, isn't it? It's it's not absolutely set in stone right at this moment in time. So if people have a concern about other issues such as dark skies, is this consultation the right place to express their views and to share their concerns?
Yes, that is, again, in terms of both the ecological impact, but also the impact on residential amenity. That is indeed an area that does fall within the scope of the partial update. So if people, we do reference it in the options document. So again, if people go back to the options document, if they've got comments on that, then yeah, please let us have those as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, I'm now going to move on away slightly from housing, but obviously sticking with planning, and just explore a little bit about the role of planning in promoting the shift to walking, cycling and mass transport. And I guess I'd also like to pick up on how the work in the local plan update may encourage electric vehicles, and what additional considerations people might want to take into account if they are perhaps thinking of getting an electric vehicle and there not being any charging points in our historic streets, or indeed in rural areas. So Alice is nodding, so hopefully Alice would like to take that question first.
Yeah, so in terms of charging points, I think we alluded to this in the presentation. There's a lot that you can do without the need for a planning application. But obviously, yeah, I think I appreciate that not everybody has a driveway, so there isn't an opportunity for everybody to install a charger. If you are thinking of installing a charger, you actually do need to you speak with Western Power Distribution. They manage the grid for the area, and it's them who actually give you permission to install the charger. I think in terms of people who don't have chargers, that's probably something that is it's been addressed through obviously our policy in terms of new builds, but also outside of the planning system there is the work the council's been doing on livable neighbourhoods that's more being progressed by our highways team, who are looking at on-street charging, but obviously that work doesn't require an application for planning permission, so it's kind of sitting outside of our policies, and with our policy will hopefully complement the work that's been done, and it's just looking at the area where we do have influence, which is in new build when parking is provided, and obviously to emphasize it's when parking is provided, because if we obviously don't want to preclude the provision of any like car-free developments and things like that.
So if I can just add to that,
Thank you.
Dina, as well, I think Alice has already referred to a separate supplementary planning document on parking standards being prepared. That document will also be looking at, as Alice has alluded to, electric vehicle charging infrastructure as part of that parking provision for new development. So that document, when it comes out for consultation later in the year, will also be looking at the delivery of electric vehicle charging infrastructure associated with new development, as Alice has quite rightly said, in terms of on-street charging infrastructure, which the council is well aware needs to be progressed and delivered. That is subject, if you like, to a separate area of work. I think you asked as well there, Dina, in terms of there's a number of questions that come in around transport. Clearly, transport is an absolutely critical element of achieving carbon neutrality. And again, the council's aware of that. So the partial update does seek to address and update a number of our transport policies, which are already favouring, if you like, and focused on more sustainable modes of transport, but we're looking to go further. So in terms of, for example, looking at the requirement for or development of transport infrastructure schemes, that as a first port of call, before we look at interventions to improve, if you like, and address highway infrastructure, that actually we first look at what could we achieve through improving walking and cycling infrastructure. For example, the location of new development, again, we're going to try and make sure even more so that is very much focused on sites that have very strong accessibility by walking and cycling and public transport. So we are trying to progress those policies as well. They're not the focus of today's session, but again, I would just say to people, please do have a look at the options document. There's a whole section there on the approaches we're intending to take forward on transport. And if you've got any comments on those, we'd obviously love to hear from you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm just going to bring Tim in quickly just to pick up the piece about mass transport, particularly with the role that WECA will have in ensuring that this is in place.
Yes, very important we get mass transport in place across the main highway corridors. It's being worked on at the moment through WECA, and there's a whole new area coming forward. But it's important where we put development in future, there is mass rapid transit in place in those particular locations, so people can easily get to transportation hubs where any new developments are actually placed. So absolutely essential we get this right. It's no good putting development in the middle of nowhere where there's no transportation whatsoever, or no bus stops, no public transport. We need to make sure people have easy access to get to main transportation hubs by using public transport, cycling, walking. They're absolutely essential areas.
Thank you. So at the same time, I was trying to scroll through the questions to see how we were doing in terms of addressing the questions that people have been raising with us. So, yeah, I think I'll just come back to, you know, the kind of like the main question here, which is, what are we seeking to achieve? And I think it'd be useful maybe just to have a few moments of just reflecting on what we are hoping to do through these, through the local plan partial update. So I'm just going to turn to my panel members and just ask them for them, what is the key wish that they hope to get out of this? Perhaps I'll turn to you, Tim, first.
I'll try and pick up your question. We are looking to, in the local plan refresh and update, to get environmental policies into place so we can all live a more sustainable future. And we're making sure that we actually have policies that actually cover issues of parking, where people park their cars, how people live their lives, so the retrofitting of homes to ensure they're energy efficient. Those are areas we actually need to work on. We also need to make sure people have homes they're happy to live in, sustainable for the future, and to ensure we actually bring ourselves in line with the carbon reduction for 2030. Absolutely essential we actually make sure also we're looking at the nature policies, which will come at a later date. But we will all be looking at it now and to ensure we actually make sure we go forward properly, so we can all live a fully sustainable future. It's our children we got to look at eventually. Because I've probably got 20 years on this planet. I don't want to leave a legacy behind myself, which actually hinders other people.
Thank you, Tim. And so it's not just the local plan that will be being updated, is that so there's a whole wide range of associated supplementary planning documents that I know people have referred to during this webinar. So I think perhaps, Richard, you could just let us know how people will, you know, how they can contribute to those associated SPDs, and any updates that might be needed for those.
Thank you, Dina. Yeah, so we are looking to update, as we've already said, a number of the SPDs or supplementary documents, those relating to the sustainable construction and retrofitting and the associated historic buildings guidance, plus a number of SPDs related particularly to transport in terms of parking standards. So that will look at, you know, how much parking is needed for new development. Can we, and in fact I think we can, we probably should be requiring less parking, you know, at locations which are well accessed by other more sustainable modes of transport. So there'll be the parking standards guidance, there'll be electric vehicle charging infrastructure guidance as well. In addition, we'll be looking to produce guidance on the design and usability, I suppose, really, of walking and cycling infrastructure, and making sure that you know, is usable and does encourage people to walk and cycle. There'll also be associated guidance relating to the biodiversity net gain requirement and how that's delivered. And again, there's, you know, there are interrelationships between a number of these issues. So, for example, walking and cycling infrastructure and design of that, you know, can also play an important role in terms of a green infrastructure corridor, for example. That then relates to wider issues around people's health and well-being, and trying to improve that. So there are links across a number of these documents in terms of achieving various council objectives. In working on those documents, we will look to engage with key community groups. and key community representatives, both within the city, but also within the rural areas, so including obviously parish and town councils. In addition to that work and involving stakeholders and communities in preparing the draft supplementary documents, they'll also be subject to consultation for a minimum of 4 weeks, may well be longer, again in order to give people the opportunity to see the draft of the document, see what we're proposing, to comment on that, and then the council will again very carefully consider the issues raised in those comments before progressing to a final version of the document. So there will be a range of opportunities for people to get involved, as I say, in the preparation of those supplementary documents.
Thank you, Richard. So I'm just going to turn to Alice just to find out, are there any other pieces that might be missing that we will be looking for during this consultation in order to achieve, the ambitions that we have as a council?
I mean, obviously these policies are focusing on what we can achieve and what we can influence through planning permissions. So I think it is important to sort of emphasise that there's a lot that you can do to your home without the need for planning permission. And it can be quite simple things as well. Yeah, and obviously there's a lot of information on our website, which we're sort of constantly trying to update and make available to help people sort of reduce the carbon output from their homes.
Thank you, Alice. I'm not sure if it's my internet connection that's going a bit funny or if it's other people's. So my apologies generally if it's mine. And Sarah, for you, is there anything else that you think that you would like to focus on or ask for people to respond to specifically in the consultation?
Thank you, Dina. I think it's just to say that, having had a look through some of the questions that have been submitted in the comments, we're so fortunate in that we've got so many people such as those on the call who have got a lot of expertise in this area and a lot of experience. And also people who live here and are going to be impacted potentially by some of the changes proposed in these policies. So I think the crucial thing to note, I suppose, for me is just that this is very much a consultation. This is an evolving, as was alluded to earlier by Dina, it's a very fast evolving area of national policy that we have to situate our local policies within. And the technology is emerging really quickly as well. So if you have a technical or even as a resident a view on this, I would just urge you really to have a look at the policies and just respond to the consultation, because we are actually genuinely kind of looking for input for people to help to put the finer points on the policy. We've got the outline that we're consulting on now, and but there's a lot to stay across in this field. So if you've got a particular point that you think that needs to be made, then we just really urge you to submit that. That'd be really helpful.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And finally, but by no means least, George, your sort of parting comments, perhaps.
So I'll wear my renewable energy hat for this one. Obviously, we want to see lots more renewable energy coming through the district, and we're trying to set out policies to encourage and facilitate these schemes coming through. Respond to the consultation, give your feedback on the wind policy, and we'll look at your answers.
Thank you very much. And I think what's is coming through loud and clear is that we need to hear from you, from everybody on this, is watching this webinar now. For those that might want to watch it later through our YouTube channel, and also those that can't see this webinar, we need to hear from as many people as possible, so we have, the full wide range of views and issues that can be then fed into the consultation, so it is properly meaningful and it properly picks up on the the issues that matter to everybody. So please, I urge you all to take part in the consultation and help us to help those that can't respond online to actually make sure their views are also heard, because it is very important. This is part of what sets how we can ensure a real viable and sustainable future for everybody in this area. So on that note, I think we have now finished our hour that we were given for this particular subject. So can I thank everybody, all my panelists for joining me and sharing their views and giving all of their expert advice, and obviously everybody who's worked behind the scenes to make sure that this webinar, and indeed all of our webinars, are as successful as they have been. And finally, I'd like to thank everybody who has watched this webinar, and also for all your comments and questions that you've put through in the question and answer section. My apologies that we haven't been able to answer every single person's question. We will endeavour to get everybody an answer, and obviously all the comments will be fed into the consultation as well. So thank you all for watching and for taking part, and I hope to see as many of you again on a future webinar. So thank you and good afternoon.